You're listening to UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. That's why. UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio.
Welcome to the special edition of Fly on the Wall Radio with the United We Strike Marathon, our first marathon of the new year 2011, our fifth event total. I'm here with a good friend of the movement and all-around good guy, Michael Rivero. How are you doing this evening, Mike?
I'm doing quite well, thank you very much.
Well, that's definitely good to hear. We're quite honored to have you here, and very honored that you've been very supportive of this for a very long time, and have been with this a long time, and I think your support's made a very big difference in the overall picture here. We're definitely all in this together.
Well, we definitely are, and I think all of us are very much dedicated to the idea of finding a nonviolent way to sort of transition this the current situation that we have here in the United States peacefully into a restoration of the constitutional republic. And obviously, as Karen has pointed out many, many times over the months, a general strike is a very good way to do that. Gandhi used that to great effect to get the British out of India. And I think ultimately it may prove very effective in getting the privately owned Federal Reserve out of the United States of America.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. We did this last year on April 15th, and we definitely noticed a bit of a difference everywhere. And we could see in our lives just by running around that, people had heard of it, and we're trying to gain more traction and do the same thing again this year, except for with a lot more people, with a lot more support, So we're gearing up for another big April the 15th general strike across the entire planet.
Well, I think we're definitely going to see a lot more people willing to participate in that, and certainly as we look around the world, we look in Europe, we look in Greece, we look in what's happening just now in Tunisia. We're beginning to realize that the attempt to globalize the economies and the politics of the world has triggered a backlash in the form of a global revolution against the money addicts. We've seen Iceland replace its government completely. We're seeing rioting in Great Britain. We're seeing rioting in Greece. I mean, they're setting the place on fire. And now, of course, the president of Tunisia has had to leave office, and now the prime minister, I guess, is in charge there, and they're looking at new elections in 60 days. So I think this is a phenomenon that's beginning to spread around the world, and I think it's almost inevitable that it's going to arrive here in the United States of America.
Oh, I totally agree. I think what we're seeing is the first stages of their entire little empire that they're building starting to fall apart on them because people are just not willing to put up with the abuses anymore. And I'm quite happy to hear what's going on in Tunisia. The fact that people are taking action and putting these people out of their countries is a fantastic thing, and we will do it here. We will do it everywhere. We'll just keep coming at this, no matter how long it takes to set things right. Well,
I think I was saying on my radio show the other day, I think people have an instinct for fairness and even-handedness and fair play. And when they see institutions, whether it's private banks or even governments, acting in a way that displays an attitude of this one favored group is supposed to get all the special privileges and the perks and a greater share of Earth's benefits than this other group over here, I think most people tend to dig their heels in, and they realize that at some level it is wrong for that attitude to be prevailing in our government and our institutions. And I think people are beginning to really kind of say, this is not a good way to be running a planet.
No, it's not. It's completely counterproductive. Instead of the people that we trust to lead us and take care of our needs and our security, it's quite the opposite. Rather than solving problems, they've been spending time engineering problems, for their own personal gain. So we've been going 180 degrees in the wrong direction for quite some time now.
Absolutely. The money's moving in the wrong place. I think more than a few writers now have commented, had the U.S. government taken that volume of cash, $14 trillion now, and instead of giving it to Wall Street to save them from that fraudulent mortgage-backed security scandal, if we had spent it on the people or just in developing technology and infrastructure for the future. What a wonderful future we could have bought for all of us, but instead that $14 trillion is just gone. And we see, I just put up 2 stories at whatreallyhappened.com today earlier that I deliberately linked together, where on the one hand, Wall Street is celebrating for these record bonuses and how much money they're all personally making, and I tagged it together with this story about how homeless people in America are now down to eating the dead birds that are falling out of the skies because of the cold weather we were all told was not going to show up. And when you juxtapose those 2 stories, you begin to realize something has gone seriously out of alignment in our country. Now, I'm not a communist and I'm not a socialist, but at the same time, there has to be a balance in our society, and for an economic system to be a system, money must be flowing at all levels and all nooks and all crannies, and it stopped doing that. The money is just drawing into these huge piles over Wall Street, over Washington, D.C., and the rest of the country is grinding to a halt, and yet when we see individual states and even cities start to say, well, we need our own monetary system, immediately the federal government comes in and says, oh, no, the legal tender law says you must be using the Federal Reserve notes. And the cities and states are saying, but the Federal Reserve isn't handing any of them out, except at exorbitant interest rates, and the government says, well, that's just the way the system is supposed to be. And I think we're definitely heading to a crisis. I'd like to see a nonviolent resolution to the situation. I don't know that that's possible. Certainly it's gone to violence all across Europe at this time.
Yep, you're absolutely right. It certainly has, and we're all working as hard as we can towards all the nonviolent solutions that we possibly can. And if we fail, it won't be for lack of effort. It won't be for lack of trying. We're certainly doing diligence by, every means necessary, every means possible, to try to bring a good resolution here. And you touched on something. It is amazing
to see. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did want to comment. It is rather amazing to see all the people who are still dedicated to a nonviolent solution to the current crisis, and how hard they're working, and the strength of the devotion to this nonviolent resolution to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. But by nature, people, want a nonviolent solution. They want to be peaceful. They want to get along with each other. But you touched on something. If what they would have done to try to fix the economy would have just been give the money to the people, divide it up, and give everybody $500,000, that would have immediately kicked off an economic boom time, the likes of which we never would have seen before, and we'd be sitting real pretty right now. Or at the very least, instead of just giving the money to the banks, how about pay off all the mortgages, and you have a bunch of newly found debt-free people that are, secure in their homes, able to spend the money they used to be spending on their mortgage and all their interest on, stimulating the economy. Again, that would have actually solved the problem. But I think it's become clear to us from watching this over the course of time that these people have no intention of solving the problem or even letting it be solved, because it does not suit their interests. It doesn't enrich them. And when we have an economic crisis and the people on Wall Street are making record profits, good grief. Just a little bit of common sense here, folks, that there's something very wrong with this picture.
Well, I like to describe it as dealing with money addiction. Now, earlier today over at whatreallyhappened.com, I put up that wonderful little clip that Charlie Chaplin did in his one and only sound movie called The Great Dictator. And at the very end, where it's exposed that he's not really the tyrant, and he says, I don't want to rule people, I want to help people. And he goes on and he talks about the greed that is destroying the society. And it's rather amazing. This was right after the end of World War II. And Chaplin already saw the same forces that had led the world into World War II were already at work again, trying to, just work their tyranny across the planet. And he called it, rampant greed, and we've had a lot of people comment about greed, but I view it as money addiction. Now, I have no problem with people being rich by their own craft and cleverness and skill and hard work. I don't have a problem with that. But we have definitely seen this tendency for people who are so addicted to money that it leads them into very destructive behaviors, destructive of the society as a whole. Bernie Madoff is a good example. This is the guy who founded the NASDAQ, and he had more money than any normal human being could even begin to spend in a single lifetime, and yet he still had to have more, to the point where he set up a new Ponzi scheme and screwed his investors out of an additional $65 billion. That's what I mean by money addiction. Now, when we look around and we see heroin addicts or cocaine addicts or even alcohol addicts, and we recognize that their behavior is very destructive of their families and their society around them, and we say, oh, that's really very, very bad, counterproductive behavior. And yet, for some reason in our society, money addiction is not viewed as an evil. The media, lionizes money addicts. Oh, look how much money this person has got. How did he get it? It doesn't matter. He's got money, and that's all that really counts. And we see these people who have made these billion fortunes. We see these $150 hamburgers on Wall Street and these $130,000 watches they're all decorating themselves with, and we say, oh, wow, isn't that really kind of cool? And I remember back during when Bernie Madoff was doing his thing, and the SEC was going over to investigate the allegations being made by Harry Markopolos, and the SEC guys were handing their resumes in to Bernie Madoff. They wanted to work with him. They wanted to get in on this money addiction thing. And I think as a society, and as we start looking forward to what kind of a country we're going to want to have in this land in the eventuality that the current regime collapses, I think we need to understand that a value system that recognizes that money addiction is a negative and socially destructive behavior, we need to really look at that. And again, this gets back to that $14 trillion that has been poured all over Wall Street, for which we've gotten absolutely nothing but a new gilded society. If we had spent that money on research and development, we would have fusion power or cold fusion power. We would have photonics. We would have all these new technologies on which to base new industries and new products, and just have this employment boom as we start making products the rest of the world would want to have. $14 trillion is enough money to mount a manned mission to Mars. And when you look at the technological fallout from Apollo, how it kicked off the microcomputer age and new material science, and the whole high-tech boom of the 70s and 80s came out of Apollo, and to have that kind of a commitment to a pure, peaceful research and development enterprise again, what a missed opportunity we're looking at here. The money is gone, and we have nothing for it except some very well-dressed, vain people in those executive offices in Wall Street.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely 100% spot on with that. That is really the core problem. It all goes down to the money. And it's really begot a parasitic profit model where all these corporations are, making their bank at the detriment of the public, because they can make a little bit more money. They can squeeze just a little bit more money out of the till by doing bad things to people, by keeping people sick, by, screwing them over, with interest in the banks and everything else. What we need to see is a paradigm shift where people start modeling their business models a little bit more progressively, where you take into account benefiting the public, forwarding all of mankind at the same time as making money. The two can be quite compatible. There is no reason that profit has to be made at the expense of other people, and that's exactly the world we're living in right now. All these big entities are making their profit at the expense, to the harm of all of us, and that really has to stop. And it is spot on. It's money addiction. They just got to have more, and they're blind to absolutely everything else, and it's really caused a lot of problems. And you were so right. I mean, we could be on Mars right now. We could be exploring the star systems. We could have warp drive by now if people would just get over themselves and start working together. And
can I share a little history with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because I think the reason that our nation fell off the path to productivity, as it were. Our nation began, first of all, we didn't even have a private central bank when the country was started. We've had 3 of them now, and all 3 have brought the nation to the edge of ruin. But I look back at the end of World War II, when we were on the winning side, and we were the only nation that had not had its industrial base bombed into rubble. And the rest of the world was coming to the United States for cars and washing machines and TV sets and especially ball bearings and machine parts with which to rebuild their own industrial base. And it was such a boom time that companies were expanding, and they didn't have managers, but they didn't want to promote the people inside their company who knew how to actually make the products, because if they promoted them, then all of a sudden they weren't able to get things done, because they needed those skilled people to stay exactly where they were. So Harvard Business School created a new concept called scientific business management, and they developed a standardized set of tools for all businesses to use. Didn't matter what the business was. You could be making donuts or pharmaceuticals or rearview mirrors. It didn't really matter. It was all PERT charts and Gantt charts and a common interface, and then they developed an educational program and an advanced degree of scientific business management called the Masters of Business Administration, the MBA. And what this did is this created a generation of trained managers, most of whom were the children of the elites to begin with, who were getting these MBAs and being inserted into management positions at companies in order to allow these companies to grow and take advantage of these economic boom times in the 1950s. Now, this created two problems. First of all, it created a major schism between the working class people who knew how things were being done in the factories and this sudden influx of managers from outside who very often were completely clueless about the products being made. And that created a lot of hostility. Second, from the point of view of the managers, because their skills were transplantable from company to company to company, they had zero respect for the individual product being made, and they didn't really care about it. Now, those MBAs of the 1950s and 60s are the CEOs of today, and they have no respect for manufacturing. And so it comes as no surprise that instead of focusing on making products to make money, the focus is now on making money the product. And all Wall Street is geared for is taking money and repackaging it and rebundling it, putting a ribbon on it and fancy wrapping and lighting and disco lighting and getting it out the door as a new form of product. When Wall Street talks about product, they're not talking about cars and washing machines and TV sets. They're talking about some new derivative instrument, some new debt obligation. And, of course, the latest one are the mortgage-backed securities, which I think future history is going to say was the biggest financial fraud in history, even bigger than the South Seas bubbles of 1720. And so as a result, it's not a surprise when you realize that 40% of the corporate profit in America comes from the financial services industries. They're making money off of money. And the product and productivity of the country is not only being given a lower priority, it's considered socially lower. And we have a society now that looks down on anybody with a screwdriver in their hand as obviously inferior social status. And as a result, we can't actually manufacture decent products because we don't reward people for building good products in the United States of America. And, you know, we have this whole elite business management and political establishment that view manufacturing as maybe a sometimes necessary evil to get them the chips to play in the really big high-profit game. And we've gone so far down that road of money being the product of this country that as soon as the money starts to collapse and fail, the whole system comes apart. We don't have anything to fall back on. There really is too little of absolute value in terms of product or services in the United States for the economy to come to rest on as this financial manipulation industry starts to fall apart.
Oh, absolutely. It's fiction, basically, and it's self-perpetuating itself into a collapse. It's the only thing it can do at this point because they've eroded away the very foundation on which all of that was built. They've lost sight of that. And, you know, you're absolutely right about the managers these days. They really don't get it. They don't have a clue. And in my previous experiences in the corporate world, it's the most frustrating thing ever when the people trying to manage the products have absolutely no clue how any of it works. So they make all of these really stupid decisions, and it's all about just money, cut costs. So the products that used to be good back in the day that would last a long time, now you get it home and it breaks. It's absolutely ridiculous. And, this is the same thing that's, coming in through all these goods overseas from China. Oh, yeah, you can save a little bit of money by buying this Chinese product, But in the long term, you're going to have to replace that 10 times, more frequently than you would have if you would have just bought a decent product that was engineered to last. We've got to get the manufacturing back.
I want to make a point here because China is a manufacturing powerhouse, and if you order a reliable, durable product from China, they can make it. A good example would be the iPhone, which is also made in China. The problem is American importers at the retail outlets, they're saying, give us the cheapest thing you know how to make, because that's what we want. And the Chinese say, okay, if you want cheap and unreliable, we'll give it to you. So, I know a lot of people want to say, oh, it's that cheap Chinese crud. Well, it's cheap Chinese crud because that's what the American importers are asking for. They don't really care about the product. They figure, if it breaks, we'll just give you another one because, after all, that's the cheapest thing that's out there and available. And I'm constantly frustrated by all the monitors that we're getting from some of these companies in China that are always dying. And they say, well, just bring it in. We'll give you a new one. Well, that takes time out of my day and annoyance and the rest of it. But, China can make good products. The problem is here in the United States, the profitability demands that they order the cheapest possible product from China. Now, what you were talking about, management not listening to the people who actually make the products, many, many years ago, I actually worked for NASA. Before I was in film, before I was a political activist, before I did talk radio and all the rest of that stuff, I worked for NASA, and I actually knew one of the people who flew on the Challenger on that final tragic mission. And I'd worked with her in Houston about 3 months before the actual disaster. And I remember it vividly. I was in Milan, Italy, when Challenger blew up, and I called JPL from Milan, and I said, I don't speak Italian. Did anybody survive? They said, no, they didn't. And it turned out what happened is the scientists and engineers who had built those solid rocket boosters were saying, do not launch these things after the O-rings have been frozen. The rings will be cracked. They'll be burned through. There had been previous burn-throughs that they just lucked out had not caused a problem. And the new NASA management, all these MBAs and political appointees with no real background in aerospace or engineering said, well, we've got the teacher in space, and we've got the TV networks, and we've got to go and do this. And basically the new NASA management pressured Morton Thiokol's management to rescind the recommendation not to launch. And the Morton Thiokol management said, well, okay, we'll roll the dice. And, of course, Challenger exploded just after Max Q on the launch sequence. And the stockholders voted out Morton Thiokol's management at the very next stock board meeting. Good for them. But the point is that disaster would not have happened if we'd had a management culture that was rooted and trained and had grown out of the products and services they're manufacturing. And we don't have that. We've created literally in this country an intentional schism, a divide between management and labor. And because management doesn't understand the products, they basically take the attitude of, well, if I don't know how it works, I really don't need to know how it works because I'm the guy with the PERT charts and the Gantt charts and the forecasting and all these trend analysis tools. And this kind of denial of importance of understanding the nuts and bolts has led to not just the disaster with the Challenger and the Columbia, but just the general decline of those products that are still made here in the United States of America. That, made in America used to mean, back in the 1950s, it was the best on the planet. And the 1950s made in Japan was the cheap crap. Now today, the best electronics are coming from Japan, and made in America is almost becoming a joke.
Oh, yeah, it totally is. I have an amateur radio, Yaesu, made in Japan, and that thing is absolutely awesome. And I sing the praises of Yaesu. I have Yaesu radios. They're almost 20 years old, and they still work. It's quite amazing. But what you said, the Challenger kind of came back and bit them, but yet they don't learn. And it's the same paradigm that caused the Gulf oil disaster. It's the same thing. The people are not listening to the people that actually understand what's actually going on. And now we have this, gigantic disaster down in the Gulf, which is going to have climactic ramifications well beyond this mythical global warming out there. They're destroying ocean currents. They're killing the ocean off. They're being wholly irresponsible, but they're not listening to anybody anybody that knows anything about what's actually going on. Oh, it's just bureaucracy at this point. And we're seeing a similar disconnect in the politics, where the people that are trying to run the country really have absolutely no clue how anything runs, so they just go make a bunch of laws. You know, oh, we're busy, we're making a bunch of laws, thousands of pages of legislation, nobody bothers to read.
They're serving the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. It just keeps going and going and going, and we're getting absolutely nowhere. It's counterproductive.
You know, I think one of the things that really angered me about the Gulf oil disaster, because I used to work down in the Gulf. I worked on a riverboat for one summer when I was just out of college. And so I got to see those people down there, and I got to see that whole area, and I got to sort of psychologically link up with that. And I think what really angered me was last July 15th, Barack Obama decided that he did not want the Gulf oil disaster to be a factor for the upcoming November election. So on the 15th, all of a sudden, the media tells us the oil has gone away. 80% of it has evaporated. It just magically disappeared. It's not an issue anymore. And then Obama flies down there with his daughter, and he goes for a swim in water that's kind of sort of maybe nearby the Gulf of Mexico, but we found out later wasn't really in the Gulf of Mexico, and comes back and says, see, it's all safe, everything's normal, and go back. And it was just, serving the agenda. They don't care about the reality of the oil disaster. I mean, we've got some of the blobs of oil from the Gulf disaster are now washing up on the beaches of Great Britain right now. We've got that reported today. And we saw the same thing here with this tragedy in Arizona, where you very quickly realize that the media and the politicians, and Rachel Maddow especially, I'm just totally disgusted with her. They don't even care what the real story was. Everybody's first reaction is, how can I use this to support my agenda? My agenda is grabbing the guns. Oh, how do we spin it to do that? The ADL's out there screaming, oh, he's an anti-Semite, so we're going to use that to support our agenda there. And it just goes on and on and on. And after a while, you begin to understand, these people don't even care what the reality of the situation was with this Jared Lohner who's got an altar with a skull in the backyard, and he's under psychiatric care, and he's been kicked out of college, and the sheriff's department knows he's been making death threats, and yet nobody's paying attention to that. It's just all about, we've got to use him to justify special protections for Congress, and we've got to pass laws saying that you can't criticize congressmen anymore, and you can't make them uncomfortable, and we've got to get new gun laws and blah, blah, blah. Everybody in politics and the media, they use everything that happens to serve their agenda. And when they're skewing the news to serve their agenda, obviously they're not serving the common public interest. It's just more of this case of lying to the people in order to trick us into going along with whatever they want. Global warming is a good example. I noticed you mentioned that earlier. They're still trying to sell this idea that, we're in our third harsh winter in a row, and they're still out there saying, oh, yes, the world is getting warmer. It's all your fault. You have to pay a carbon tax for it.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. The betrayal of the media and the public servants, to further their own agendas is just absolutely off the chart. It's unacceptable. It's just going to continue until we, the people, take a viable enough stand to say, hey, we've had enough of this. We're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to play this game. And thankfully, we have the Internet, and we have, shows like ours that we're able to actually speak out and talk about what's really happening, what's really going on, to get to the real story, and not gloss over it, not try to use it for an agenda. As long as these politicians and these media people are getting their pockets lined by their special interest backers, they don't care. They're getting rich. That's all they're after. It's a narrow focus. We have to benefit ourselves. Profit, profit, profit. Who cares what the ramifications are tomorrow? We're getting rich today. It's very short-sighted, and they're basically destroying themselves along with us, and they just don't see it. They're too arrogant and short-sighted and greedy to understand what they're doing is harming everyone, including themselves. They're going to erode away the base upon which they stand, and the entire thing's going to come falling down around them. And there's nothing that's going to stop it. It's already started.
Well, one of the downsides of a government in which the leaders are rotated through on a rapid basis is that, and this goes all the way back to 1913 with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, every administration, every Congress comes in and says, I only have to keep things looking good until the end of my term or the end of the next, into the next election. And beyond that, I really don't care. And it is almost impossible to get anybody in government to look at plans that are going to take 20 years to mature. They want something that they can use to look good for the next election. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years into the future. That's all they're thinking. And, as we look at the accumulating debt of the Federal Reserve System, and you need to understand that the Federal Reserve System is a pyramid. And it is a trap, because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money was owed to the Federal Reserve than is actually in existence. And that debt has been accumulating, and each Congress and president says, I don't need to deal with this. I just got to make things look good, and I'll put this whole accumulating debt off onto the next administration. And we're almost 100 years in. And each succeeding government administration does whatever it takes to look good for the moment, and then says, it's their problem to solve down the road. And I think a classic example of that would have to be during the Clinton administration, when he manufactured his phony federal budget surplus by looting the Social Security Trust Fund of all the cash buildup that had been put in there for the baby boomer retirements. And now here we are. The baby boomers are starting to retire. The Social Security Trust Fund is empty, and everybody's saying, we have a crisis in Social Security. We're going to have to raise Social Security taxes. We're going to have to cut benefits, blah, 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 blah. And nobody will go back and say, well, the reason that there's a crisis in Social Security is because the Clinton administration basically looted the retirement funds of Americans. But every administration does that, and each new administration that comes into office will accept that burden and that expectation that they're not going to speak ill of prior administrations. And the problems have been accumulating to the point where there is no solution anymore. And I'm absolutely convinced that the U.S. government is going to go the way of the USSR. It's going to collapse and fade into history, as it deserves to do, and the collapse of Wall Street will probably be the initiating event.
Yep, absolutely, because the governments are so heavily vested in Wall Street. Once that collapses, their entire financial empire comes crashing down around their ankles, and there's not going to be anything they can do about it. It's inevitable. The Federal Reserve System itself, being a pyramid scam, is designed to implode upon itself. It could only go so much farther. That they can keep printing money, but it's going to keep devaluing it. The dollar now has been devalued at 93% of what it was back when the Federal Reserve was created. It is out of control, and it's not going to be able to be fixed. It's going to have to be replaced. We're going to have to re-engineer these things. We have to build these things back up from the bottom up. Start working in the communities, the counties, the states. Anybody that thinks we're going to be able to do a top-down solution and fix the federal government by just sticking new people in there, no, that's not going to happen. It's beyond the point of repair, because the very game itself that they play there is corrupt. You can get the best person in the world, stick them in office, and by the end of it, they're going to become corrupt in order to get anything done at all. So that's why it's so important to start working in our communities and working from the ground up. We don't need to worry about what's going on in the federal government as much as our local communities and our counties. And there's things we can do a lot easier inside of our states and our counties and our towns, to hold the politicians accountable there. There's viable recalls there, not federal level. That's never going to work, but that's where all the politics is born, is at the local level. So over the course, maybe we'll get a little bit of a paradigm shift where these people start to realize, hey, wait a minute, we're supposed to be representing the people, and we're accountable to the people. But it's never going to happen from the top down. It's absolutely impossible. It's gone way too far.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. What we need to do is go back to the model that this nation was originally founded on, which was the states had their own power. It was not supposed to be a single country. It started out as 13 little tiny countries in a loose confederation. And over the course of time, the emergence of the Federal Reserve and the emergence of the federal government are what transformed a collection of aligned small nations into a single imperial power that has done nothing but wage war and impoverish its people, ever since. And I think when the federal government collapses, I think we'll see probably the United States is probably going to balkanize. And we're going to see it break off into maybe 2 or 3 little tiny chunks. But, this focus about going back into the community, back into the county level, back into the state level, that's what we need to do. Because that whole federal bureaucracy and that whole Federal Reserve were not intended when this country was created we were supposed to be the United States, plural, of America. Not United State of America, but the United States. And we were supposed to be 13, eventually 50, individual little nations that were collected together in a loose confederation. And the federal government's original constitutional authority was only to arbitrate disputes, regulate trade between the states, and to build an army only in time of invasion from a foreign power. Obviously, the federal government has become this huge cancer in our society. It has long since exceeded its constitutional limits. They're not even making polite noises of obeying the Constitution anymore. We have this Federal Reserve, which was never intended when the nation was started. We've had 3 of these private central banks. All 3 of them have nearly wrecked the country. In the past, we had moral leaders of strength and courage who were able to shut this whole thing down. Andrew Jackson's dying words were, "I killed the bank," because he ended the second Bank of the United States. And he almost got assassinated for it. Lincoln issued the greenback to free the country from the clutches of the private bankers. That may have played a role in his assassination. John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 11110, issuing U.S. notes based on silver in the Treasury. He put about $4.5 billion into circulation that was not dependent on the Federal Reserve. 5 months later, he was assassinated. And I know a lot of people say, oh, no, come on, that's Lee Oswald did it and blah, 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 blah. But if you look at the Warren Commission, one of its members was John J. McCloy, president of the World Bank, president of Chase Manhattan Bank. Now, I don't care how good a banker he is. He's not qualified to investigate a homicide, which is, we are told, what the Warren Commission was supposed to be about. But if the Warren Commission existed to cover up the real causes of the death, and if the bankers had had a hand in killing the president who was challenging the might of the Federal Reserve, then John J. McCloy's presence on the Warren Commission becomes perfectly understandable.
Yeah, can we say conflict of interest? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous on its face. And the information's there. It's just, classified and buried. Maybe, once, things resolve themselves, as it collapses and we get control of this again back in the hands of the people, we'll actually get to find out what really happened on all that and get the truth out there. The secrecy is absolutely repugnant.
Yeah, when the government collapses and we have a new government in place, I'm definitely going to put in my resume to be in charge of the National Archives and go digging through this. Oh, look at all this good stuff. We're going to get it out there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because it all needs to be brought to light. We need to understand our history. If we're not allowed to know what really happened, throughout the course of our history, what the real true story is, the cause, the effect, the why, and the play.
Okay, I'm losing.
We're going to be doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, and they've really sabotaged this in our education. They give us this. We having a little bit of a technical, kerfuffle here.
Yes, we are.
Oh,
okay.
Yes. The gremlins have been full force today. We've had some interesting times with this live broadcast today. I guess we should have gone with the GMO hamsters instead of the ethanol-fed producers. But hey, live and learn. And the technology, the infrastructure, and I know we talked about this, together on your show, how it's just gone downhill. It's absolutely ridiculous. My internet connection here on most days is down more than it's up. It's almost like it's sentient. When I'm just sitting here just killing time, just surfing the web just for fun, for no other important reason, it usually works pretty good. But the second I start getting into something meaningful, it always starts cutting out every 5 minutes, and it's just an absolute bear to work with. It's just like it's developing a life of its own. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I'm sorry about that, Dave. Would you like me to stop disconnecting your internet every time you do something? I'm really sorry. I thought that was the way to go. I'm sorry about that. I just want to bring some humor in, and now I'm out. I'll leave you guys to it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Excellent interview, by the way.
I want to insert a story here because, we have the same problem out here. We had a major lightning storm come through here a few days ago, and it knocked out our internet, knocked out the cable TV, knocked out the non-digital phone lines. We just got the phone lines back about 4 hours ago. And, it's just the infrastructure is on such a thin edge. There's no resilience. It's just we have no flood control. Our roads are being allowed to go back to gravel. Bridges are collapsing. Mines are collapsing. The Gulf oil disaster. The infrastructure is just right on the very thin edge of collapse. And the analogy I like to use is here in Hawaii, several years ago, we had this incident where one of the little commuter jets that island hops to go from one island to the other was in the air between islands, and all of a sudden, 18 feet of the roof of the cabin just blew off completely.
Oh, wow.
And one stewardess was sucked out, and she was killed, and the pilot amazingly got the thing to land. None of the passengers were hurt. They scrapped the thing on the ground, and they inspected a bunch of the other planes and found they were about ready to blow up as well. And it turned out what happened was that the fatigue analysis on the airplane didn't take into account multiple short hops, what they call cycles in an aircraft. It was basically so many hours in the air, you can expect so much fatigue on the hull. And because, the planes are only in the air an hour for each flight, during a cycle, the wear and tear on the aircraft was actually much greater than was being predicted. But the point is, it was understood that the aircraft was developing little tiny fine cracks here and there and here and there, and as long as the cracks stayed separate, the airplane could still fly. But as soon as the cracks all joined up, then all of a sudden, kaboom, and the whole thing blew up. Now, what we're seeing in the United States of America right now is we're seeing all kinds of cracks in our national infrastructure, whether it's the roads deteriorating. I mean, we've got the second worst roads in the country here in Hawaii. Every driver can expect to pay hundreds of dollars in repairs for damage to his car driving over the roads that we have here. The flood control is not working. Bridges are collapsing. The cracks are everywhere. We've got a whole bunch of dams that are on the verge of collapsing. When all of those individual problems join up, we're going to see some major, major catastrophes in this country. And, our government will probably say, oh, it's that gosh darn Al-Qaeda, or it's global warming, or it's Bigfoot and Elvis in a UFO or something. But the reality is that the federal government justifies its existence and its excessive taxation with the promise that it's going to take care of this country. And yet we have seen the federal government taking care of everything but this country. Our rural roads are being allowed to go back to dirt and gravel because there's no money to maintain them. But American tax dollars right now are being spent to build brand new, fully paved, Jews-only highways in the occupied West Bank. We're buying Israel these F-35 warplanes left and right. They're bailing out Wall Street, all this money for these pointless wars all over the planet, and there's nothing left over for the American people who are expected to pay for all of this stuff. In a way, very real way, we're already in World War III. We're living in a wartime economy. The money is taken from the people. It's spent on war. We're expected to just sort of make do with the deteriorating lifestyle around us. And if you look around at just how deteriorated our nation has become, you'll understand that when I say that I think we're already losing World War III. We're losing it. Our nation is being destroyed bit by bit. We don't have to be invaded by an outside enemy if our government is in fact destroying our own nation from within in order to hand money out to everybody, all these other people.
Absolutely. And as things start to decay, they'll just use that as an excuse to raise taxes. They'll give themselves bonuses, give Israel more money, give the bankers more money, and things will just get worse. They'll use that as an excuse for even more money. And, of course, they never address the problems. And, we are in World War III.
Well, they never address the fact we don't have any more money to give them. That's the thing. I mean, January 1 saw the biggest tax increase in American history. They're still trying to find some way they can talk us all into agreeing to a carbon tax for global warming, and what the federal government does not seem to understand. I mean, we've got a huge tax non-compliance problem in this country. We've got people crashing airplanes into the IRS offices. What the government does not seem to want to admit is we, the American people, don't have any more money to give them. The federal government gave tax incentives to corporations to offshore high-paying jobs to other countries, and with those jobs go the tax revenues that those jobs would have generated. So the government is saying, well, we need more tax revenues. We, the American people, don't have it. We're broke. We're on the verge of homelessness. And it's insane that the people in Wall Street and Washington, D.C. are living in a dream world. They're delusional. They still have convinced themselves that the American people represent a vast pool of untapped wealth, and they just have to figure out some way to get us to send it to them. And we see this whole idea, I mean, even when the economy was coming apart this last year, we kept seeing all these stories about, well, you know, the economy would be great if you, gosh darn, Americans would just start spending more money. We don't have it to spend. And they're just not getting it in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. They're living in a dream world.
They're clueless. You know, I don't know what
really
they're smoking, but it might be interesting to get a hold of.
Wish they'd share some of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we might at least be a little happier with all this nonsense. Oh, yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. It's ridiculous. And, you know, back to the previous point, yeah, I think history will mark that World War III began September 11th, 2001. You know, and all the things that happened as a result of that, you know, is what's enabled it. And it may even go back even further than that, because we've been on this imperial, you know, warmongering thing all over the place for quite some time. And it's ridiculous. And they are going to just keep trying to bleed us dry. Well, I got news for them. My turnip bled to death a long time ago. If they want its corpse, they can have it, but it's not going to do them any good.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I was thinking back to Patrick Henry's speech, the very famous "Give me liberty and give me death," or "Give me death" one. And, you know, it sounds like this basic bravado kind of speech making. And then I all of a sudden realized that what he was really saying to the Crown and to the Bank of England, who was the real nemesis to the colonies at the time, was he was simply saying, I'm not going to be a slave. I'm not going to be your slave. You're either going to let me be free or you're going to kill me, but it doesn't matter. Either way, I will not be your slave, so you might as well quit trying right now and save us all a lot of grief. Unfortunately, King George III did not listen to that advice, which led to Yorktown and the Treaty of Paris and a great deal of unhappiness on everybody's side. But that's the same message that we all need to send to the U.S. federal government and to Wall Street. We will not be your slaves anymore. And if it means you're going to kill us, that's fine. We're still not going to be your slaves because, you know, dead people are really not of very much use to anybody.
No, they're certainly not. It's they don't understand. There's such a disconnect from it. They don't see that they're eroding the very foundation on which they've built themselves their empire on. You know, it's on the backs of we the people, and they've bled us all dry. There's no more, you know, stuff to go back for the till for. I mean, we're done. I mean, everybody's dropping like flies financially. They're losing their homes, they're losing their jobs, they're losing their lives, and it's only going to keep getting worse until this starts to turn around. And that's going to take, you know, concerted action between, you know, those of us who are aware and willing to have the cojones to take a stand and try to do something useful.
Well, what it really comes down to is, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, the Federal Reserve System is a pyramid scheme. It's a Ponzi scheme, just like Bernie Madoff was doing. And what it is the instant that first Federal Reserve note went into circulation, more money was owed to the bank than was in existence. So what happens is you go out and you find more borrowers to borrow from the Federal Reserve. Then that money circulates through the economy and gets swept up to pay the interest on the old money. And in order to clear that new debt, you've got to find yet another layer of borrowers and a new generation of borrowers. And so the Federal Reserve for almost 100 years has survived on each succeeding generation being lured into debt in order to justify the creation of new money that is used to pay the interest on the old money. But the aggregate debt keeps going up. When you reach the point where you cannot find more borrowers, the pyramid starts to unravel, and that's what's going on here. And generally what happens is the government will step in and they'll do one of two things. They'll force you to borrow, which is what happened in Great Britain when they cut all the educational subsidies in order to force the students to go and get student loans. Or the government will simply borrow on behalf of the people, which is what Washington, D.C. did with TARP and all the bailouts. They're basically saying, we will go to the banks and we will borrow trillions of dollars on your behalf, without your permission, I might add, in order to allow Ben Bernanke to print up more money to give to Wall Street in the hope that they'll turn around and loan it to you at interest. In fact, I like to describe the bailouts as very simply taking $1 trillion from the American people and giving it to the banks so the banks can loan it back to the people at interest. And when you realize that that really is the essence of what they're doing, you begin to understand the federal government is very much in league with the financial corporations, and that's what makes this a fascist country. And I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I basically want to sum up here. We have all these people screaming about Obama the socialist and everything. We are not a socialist nation. We went from capitalism straight into fascism. We went past socialism so fast we didn't even have time to wave at it as it whizzed on by here. Benito Mussolini, and we all acknowledge he's the global expert on fascism. Benito Mussolini said that fascism should be called corporatism because it is the merging of corporate and government power against the general population. And we're already hearing that Washington, D.C. is planning on sorting out this fraudulent foreclosures mess by simply retroactively declaring it to be legal and basically gutting any borrower's rights to redress. And one of the most onerous and obvious crimes that they're getting ready to do is they're going to pass a law saying that you cannot sue a bank for fraud on your mortgage until the mortgage is completely paid off. Then you can turn around and sue the bank if you think they acted wrongly. Well, obviously, in our current situation, the problem is people can't pay their mortgages off. Therefore, if this law gets passed, and the banks and the Federal Reserve are lobbying hard for it, if this law gets passed, it basically means the banks can come and take your home, and you don't have the legal right to sue anymore. And we have already seen where banks are foreclosing on homes that are not behind in their mortgage payments. We have had several cases because of this whole mortgage electronic registration system and these paper mill, these foreclosure mills. Banks have started foreclosure procedures on homes that don't even have mortgages. It's completely out of control. And their solution to fix the problem is to simply say, we're going to hamstring the homeowners so they can't fight back. So if we make a mistake, golly gee whiz, we're sorry about making a mistake, but hey, what's more important, saving the American people or saving the banks? And I remember we had that congressman, Damon Silvers, I think his name was, and he was talking about the situation in the hearing in Congress, and he said, we can either have a rational solution to this foreclosure problem, or we can preserve the capital structure of the banks. We cannot do both. And he was absolutely right, and it's becoming very clear which side the federal government is on.
Oh, absolutely. That is so true. And this whole mortgage modification program is just a scam to get more people into foreclosure. And I've got a friend here that's happened to. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's going to be to the point where there's nothing left that we've got that they can loot. They're going to have to start relying on the cockroaches.
Yeah,
and boy, won't that be an interesting paradigm.
No, we're in a situation right now where, the bankers got involved in this fraudulent mortgage-backed security swindle. They got caught at it. Now they're now admitting that there was fraud there. Alan Greenspan is saying there was fraud and criminality. They're being forced to buy back all this bad paper that they sold and to make good on all the credit default swaps. And in order to not go out of business, they're having to grab your homes. This is wealth confiscation. Private home ownership in the United States is coming to an end. And this is just like Franklin Roosevelt in 1933, and he started confiscating all Americans' gold in order to protect the banks from default during the wartime. But in this case, they're doing it in a very covert way to make you think it's your own fault you're losing your home. The government gives tax credits to corporations to ship high-paying jobs to other countries, and that sets you up to have your home taken by the banks. The short version is the government took your jobs so the banks can take your homes so they can buy their way out of the fraudulent mortgage-backed security, so they don't have to go to jail. And then they reward themselves with these record-setting bonuses and $150 hamburgers and $130,000 wristwatches to remind themselves how very, very clever they are and that this is the way the universe is supposed to operate.
Oh, it's ridiculous, and they'll just turn around and invent some new scam and do the same thing over and over again. It's a repeating pattern. Well,
they're already doing it. They're looking at a new bubble built out of student loans. They're still trying to get the bubble out of carbon dioxide going. You know, we've become a nation of scammers. Nobody wants to make a product to make money. They just want to create bubbles and exploit them, and they're already thinking, what's the next big bubble that's going to come along that we can get rich on and dump the costs onto the people?
Absolutely. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour here. We'll take a break. You're welcome to stick with us and continue as long as we want after we bring everybody on for just a quick word, or we can wrap this up. I really appreciate you coming on with us, and I certainly appreciate all the support that you've given United We Strike. It's been very valuable, and it's been an honor talking with you this evening.
Well, thank you very much, and I have to be very honest. I am feeling very much under the weather right now, and I would like to sign off at the top of the hour if you don't mind.
Oh, no, I don't mind at all. I certainly understand you need to get to feeling better, so you can get back on the broadcast schedule and keep telling the truth to the people, because what you're doing is a very valuable service to us all, and we're definitely better off with folks like you out there.
Michael, thank you very much for all your support.
Well, thank you, Karen. I wish we'd heard more from you tonight.
Well, you heard a lot from me all day long, so I decided to give it a break.
I don't blame you one bit at all, Karen. And I just a special shout out to you. I mean, you are so intensely dedicated to this process and to this national strike, and we're seeing it all across Europe. It's got to come to the United States of America sooner or later, and let's just please promise we're going to keep it peaceful, because violence only justifies more violence on the part of the government, and they're going to have enough of their agents provocateurs trying to piss us all off anyway, so we got to be very, very calm about it.